entering the Strait of Malacca, one of the world's most important shipping lanes. This narrow waterway carries energy, goods and raw materials between Europe, the Middle East and Asia. Could it become the next major choke point crisis?
If you think the Strait of Hormuz is critical, take a look at this. Behind me is the entrance to the Strait of Malacca. This narrow stretch of water links the Indian Ocean with the South China Sea and the Pacific.
I got on a small Indonesian fishing boat surrounded by oil tankers, container ships and bulk carriers. I want to find out just how vulnerable this waterway really is and what role countries like Indonesia could play in any future crisis. Could they bring all traffic here to a halt?
This is not a new idea. This is an idea that has always been lurking in the Indonesian psyche for a very long time, and no doubt it will surface again in due course.
That was the former permanent secretary at Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I met him at a security conference where choke points have become a key topic. Singapore has the largest maritime hub in the region, and they are not the only ones concerned about free navigation.
Dan jadi selat ini memang sangat ramai kapal tanker, kapal kargo yang melintas, sehingga kalau hujan badai seperti tadi itu jarak pandang yang menghalangi kapten kapal karena jalurnya terlalu ramai sehingga sering sekali terjadi tabrakan.
The Strait of Malacca sits right between Indonesia, Singapore and Malaysia and is one of the shortest sea routes between East Asia, Europe and the Middle East. In 2025, more than 3 times as many ships passed through here than through the Strait of Hormuz. Malacca is also the world's largest oil transit choke point. A big share of that oil is headed to China, which would likely feel the impact of any disruption more than most countries.
On this shipping app, it becomes pretty obvious. Think of this as a maritime highway. The red dots are tankers. The green dots are cargo ships. For China, this isn't just traffic. It's a lifeline. Around 3/4 of China's seaborne crude oil imports pass through here. In Beijing, that vulnerability has a name: the Malacca Dilemma.
The vulnerability isn't new, but recent tensions about the Hormuz Strait have put maritime choke points back in the spotlight.
Hormuz is important, but if traffic through Malacca were seriously disrupted, the impact on the global economy could be even bigger.
So if this route is so important, could Indonesia ever use that as leverage?
This is the Indonesian finance minister who recently announced that tolls could be considered.
Tapi kapal lewat Selat Malaka nggak kita charge ya. Nggak tahu betul apa salah. Sekarang Iran mau nge-charge kapal lewat Selat Hormuz katanya. Kalau kita bagi 3, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapura, lumayan kan? Punya kita jalurnya paling besar, paling panjang. Singapura kecil, Malaysia sama kita bagi 2 lah.
The common set off alarm bells internationally, and Jakarta quickly walked back on the idea.
But if one single country wants to close the strait, as well as the 2 alternative routes around it, it could only be Indonesia. Taiwan's former defense minister believes, however, that this is unlikely. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, is one of the key factors to prevent unilateral action that could hurt members.
ASEAN will find ways to prevent these things happen in the region because they also depend upon trade, sea link communication, right? So anybody who try to block the choke point or taking the actions to tax the passages, they'll be in trouble. Everybody suffer.
Experts agree that the economic fallout for Indonesia and others should be enough of a deterrent. But there are scenarios where exactly this economic disruption could have strategic value. For instance, for the United States. The country just deepened its regional defense ties with Indonesia, and Indonesians know all too well what could happen if a crisis between the US and China, for example over a blockade of the Taiwan Strait, were to escalate.
Most probably, maybe the US will also counter blockade China, especially in the Strait of Malacca or Singapore. So probably Indonesia will get the pressure to help our partners in countering this blockade.
Beijing has long been aware of this strategic vulnerability and has spent years trying to reduce it, for instance by boosting domestic oil production.
We also see China paying even more attention to supply chains as a national security concern, including through the recent promulgation of regulations on industrial and supply chain security, for instance. So Beijing is already putting in place a range of measures in order to address those supply chain vulnerabilities, including those that flow through the Strait of Malacca.
Beijing also believes that its strong ties with Indonesia would make it difficult for any outside power to persuade Jakarta to restrict Chinese trade.
You know, just look at the example, of the Strait of Hormuz, which American ally would really offer to help, even if Trump asked for it, right? Because nobody understands why Trump would launch this war. So, alliance is just like herding the cats. Not all countries would blindly follow the big brother's call.
My boat is about to cross into Malaysian territorial waters. Here we make a turn at the so-called Green Lane.
Di jalur internasional. Jadi ke Malaysia tidak, ke Singapura tidak, ke Indonesia tidak. Ini tengah-tengah dia. Jalur land kapal dia. Jadi kita tak boleh masuk ke sana sekali. Nanti kita kena tangkap Malaysia lah. Ini jalur land internasional, garis dia.
Singapore, Malaysia and Indonesia are all signatories. The legal framework behind this is the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, better known as UNCLOS.
Under international law, ships have what is called a right of transit passage. So even though these are national waters, international shipping must be allowed to pass through.
China has signed it, Germany has signed it, so have most major trading nations. Recent tensions around the Strait of Hormuz have once again highlighted why these rules matter.
The Strait of Hormuz has been more or less nationalized by the Iranians. And so that's why we need to insist on diplomacy and respect of international law. And we believe that UNCLOS, with all its stipulations on the international strait regimes, is a very good foundation for managing freedom of navigation across the globe.
But agreeing on international law is one thing, enforcing it is another, says the former permanent secretary at Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
During the Cold War, Indonesia and Malaysia challenged how other nations use the strait.
In a rare moment of united action in the height of the Cold War, 1971, the then Soviet Union and the United States sent their navy up and down the Malacca Straits just to show Indonesia and Malaysia, the hell with you. It is an international waterway and you can't stop us. At that time, China did not have a blue water navy or any navy worth talking about. But if they had a navy, I have no doubt they would have joined in too.
For China, the Strait of Malacca remains strategically indispensable. And that leaves Indonesia in a delicate position.
It's a kind of negative leverage, which will always trigger some kind of a backlash, right? And so that's an example where countries and stakeholders inside and outside the region have to sit together and talk these things out.
Indonesia needs to balance relations with both Washington and Beijing, while sitting astride one of the world's most important trade routes.
The lesson from Hormuz is that once a crisis erupts, there are few good options left. That's why planning matters, because keeping a choke point like this one open is always easier than dealing with the consequences when it closes.